Hello, this is Jeff. Welcome back to my cave of cool books. Recently, the outlaw Levi Wallace on his channel and our buddy Nick at the Book Graveyard talked about the novel, the original novel of the Night Stalker, which was the basis for the famous and extremely popular TV movie, The Night Stalker, which then led to another movie, The Night Strangler, and a subsequent TV series, Kolchak, The Night Stalker. Very fun series of TV movies and television episodes. And Nick and Levi talked about the movie and the novel by the writer Jeff Rice and compared the two of them together. It was a very fun live chat. And I wanted to do a kind of response to that in a way, because I think both of them might, and others who are fans of these movies and the TV series, the Kolchak, The Night Stalker, would be interested in this particular book that I'm going to talk about. So off my shelf, I was lucky enough to get the revised second version of this. This is the Night Stalker Companion. This is the 25th anniversary edition, or a 25th anniversary tribute. Now the series came out in 1974, so this book, I believe, came out from Pomegranate Press in 1997, it said. So, well, if you take the TV movie, 1972 is when The Night Stalker came out. So from 25 years from that first TV movie. Now, unfortunately, this is out of print and hard to get, but this is a very good companion piece. This is, again, back in the day before Wikipedia was a thing. So now you can, or IMDb, where now you can go and find some cast and plot summary information very easily online. So some of these, this book contains some detailed story synopses that might not be necessary now. But what is very valuable are all the interviews with the key personnel and breakdown of behind-the-scenes filming of both the TV movies and the series that came a couple years after that first Night Stalker movie. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the Night Stalker or Kolchak, Kolchak is a very kind of sneaky and old school, hard-nosed reporter. Seemingly, once could have got the brass ring of being a big, huge reporter, but probably with his anti-authoritarian stance got him kicked out of that position, and now he's trying to eke out a living first in a Las Vegas newspaper in the first movie. Then he moves to Seattle for The Night Strangler in 1973, and then the 1974 series, which had 20 episodes produced before the plug was pulled on it by all concerned. That was set in the INS news department, to kind of, I guess, a stringer news service in Chicago. Kolchak always trying to get his way back with the big story, constantly being thwarted in his efforts to do so by the people in charge, because he's always wanting to publish details that they don't want to be let out. Anyway, excellent first TV movie. Very good, and in some ways better, less original, because the second one, The Night Strangler, follows the basic same plot structure of the first one, but it's a little longer, has space for a little more humor and eccentric characterization, has some probably a better female co-star that bounces very well off lead Darren McGavin, who plays Kolchak, and Joanne Flug, who plays this young exotic dancer and university student who really teams up with Kolchak and the Night Strangler, and that's really fun. And both of those are great. There was a third TV movie that was mooted but never happened, and perhaps it would have been better quality-wise had they just continued with a couple of more TV movies. But they tried to turn it into a series, and then it became maybe a little repetitive, because Kolchak meeting a monster of the week every week in the same location in Chicago is kind of ridiculous. But the show leaned more into the comedy side, always had some really good guest casts and some particularly some of them had some pretty creepy episodes despite a low budget. Unfortunately, there was a lot of infighting between Stark and Darren McGavin, who is so amazing. He's the one who really makes this show as well as the movies work, and so he's a very important component. But he wanted the show to be one thing, and the producers for the series, Cy Shermack especially, wanted it to be another thing, and there was a constant clash behind the scenes. Some writers who contributed to the series include Robert Zemeckis, and Bob Gale, who went on to do, Back to the Future and others. David Chase was a story editor, script editor for quite a bit, and he created The Sopranos, of course. So there was some good talent in front of and behind the camera on this show. But, eventually it was becoming such a problematic situation that all concerned just decided to throw their hands in the air and give up, and the ratings weren't doing as well as they should, and the show ended up being canceled before the first season even was complete, because back in those days the seasons would have been around 28 episodes or so this only got to 20. Anyhow, all of that is by the by, because this was a highly influential series, and the TV movies as well, inspired Chris Carter to create the X-Files, and was very refresh and original take, especially in the first movie, the Night Stalker, combining hard-bitten big city newspaper reporting story with a vampire tale. In the second movie, it's more of the Night Strangler, it's more of a kind of Dorian Gray / Jekyll and Hyde sort of thing, and then in the series, of course, Kolchak would go on to deal with Jack the Ripper as a immortal sort of killer, and werewolves, zombies, a return of one of the victims from the first TV movie in the series. One of the female victims becomes a vampire or vampiress herself, and goes on a blood-sucking rampage in Los Angeles, and all sorts of reptilian creatures and demonic beings and witches and succubi, all sorts of cool weird beasties and monsters that Kolchak would fight on a week-to-week basis. What made Kolchak so fun and so interesting of a character as McGavin played him is he was just kind of an everyman guy. He was kind of, he didn't dress well. He was irritating. He was kind of conned his way into people's confidences to get information on the story. But in his relentless pursuit of the story, he basically has to end up taking down most of these vicious, murdering creatures himself. And in a way, he's quite ballsy and brave. So, very interesting character. Anyway, I want to talk about this book. Now, this book is harder to find these days. There was an original version written and published, I believe. It was published in 1984, and then 13 years later, Mark Dawidziak, the writer, and that's how you say his name, Dawidziak, wrote this revised version. Dawidziak also wrote a really good book on the Columbo series with Peter Falk, the Columbo File it's called, and that was also recently, a couple of years ago, republished in a newer version with ever so slight additions of to and afterword. Dawidziak is a professor, I believe, of media studies at some big school back east in America. Forgot exactly where. When he wrote this, Dawidziak was the critic at large in the entertainment department of the Akron Beacon Journal. But I believe he since moved on to become a professor at somewhere else. And this is Mr. Dawidziak here. And of course, Darren McGavin himself, Kolchak himself. Now let's talk a little bit about this book. It's very well written and interesting if you're a fan of this series. There's the intrepid Carl Kolchak right there. Now all the photos inside are in black and white. Then it talks about, the first 70 pages or so of this book is all about the Jeff Rice's novel, how the story came to be produced by ABC for a TV movie of the week, talking about the director the producer Dan Curtis, the director John Llewellyn Moxey, and the writer Richard Matheson, famous Twilight Zone writer. So, he gives his acknowledgments at the start and has extensive interviews with all of the people involved. So he interviews Jeff Rice, and he talks about here's some photos of Mr. Rice right here, both younger and later in his life, who was trying to keep involved and get a foothold in Hollywood, and kind of got stymied both for some unfair reasons as well as others where the producers thought he was getting a little too hands-on, a little too pushy. And unfortunately, I don't have the two novels. I almost bought a version that had both novels in there, but I don't have them at the moment. Dan Curtis, the producer. Dan Curtis did also other great TV movies, including the Jack Palance Dracula and Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He did the 70s Frankenstein TV movie with Robert Foxworth. He, of course, created the famous Gothic supernatural soap opera Dark Shadows. And he was instrumental in getting at least the TV movie versions of Kolchak, the Night Stalker, on the airwaves. Now, of course, the Night Stalker, the reason that it was changed to Kolchak, the Night Stalker, is Kolchak is not the Night Stalker. The Night Stalker in the first TV movie is, of course, Skorzeny, the vampire, terrorizing people in Las Vegas in the early 70s. And that's what made that movie so fresh and original, is it was a vampire story, completely modernized, a classic style vampire brought kicking and screaming really into the 70s and in urban Los Angeles. And so it's just this really clever mix of the Gothic and the modern kind of big city crime sort of aspect that really made it feel fresh, as well as, of course, taut script from Rice's novel. Levi and Nick really went into a lot of the differences, stage by stage of the difference between the TV movie and the novel by Rice in that live stream. So I'm not going to do that here, but very fascinating stuff. Here's Barnabas Collins, Jonathan Frid playing the vampire in that Dark Shadows soap opera, which kind of went on to lead to the making of The Night Stalker. And of course, they profiled Darren McGavin, who was the perfect choice to play Kolchak. Here he is behind the scenes with his wife, Kathy Brown, who also shows up as one of the typically Kolchak-hating police sergeants or police chiefs of the week that we see in the movies and the series. And Kathy Brown was a glamorous actress on her own right. And of course, her and McGavin were married a long time. And here's Carol Lindley, who plays Kolchak's probably implied but not stated hooker girlfriend in the first movie. Carol Lindley, always a kind of spacey, albeit beautiful actress. Does a good job in this, though, as kind of a, not just a down-to-earth sort of lady in this. Here's him getting ready to try to stake the vampire in that first movie. And then here we have the director John Llewellyn Moxey, British director who directed a lot of really good TV movies of the week, and Barry Atwater, who played the vampire Skorzeny. Anyway, lots of detail about the making, the reception, how well Kolchak did, even by the standards of by 83 even, 11 years later, Kolchak, the Night Stalker original TV movie was still the 5th highest rated TV movie of all time at that stage. And to this day, it just had giant ratings, 54 share, which is amazing. This TV movies aren't really made anymore these days, but if they were, they would kill for ratings like that. And here's Darren McGavin as Kolchak, sparring verbally with his editor, Tony Vincenzo, played by the great Simon Oakland. They have wonderful chemistry together. And of course, Simon Oakland carries on to the sequel movie, The Night Strangler, and the series. And then they get to The Night Strangler, Part 2. And there's interviews with, of course, Richard Matheson and all the other people involved. Here's Dan Curtis on the set of the second TV movie. And then we get to the actual series, from sequel to series. And it goes through each episode. First, it starts with the gestation of the series and how Jeff Rice was kind of kept out of the loop of that. And how they added some extra characters in the INS newsroom in Chicago, including Jack Greenidge as Ron Updike, the kind of fussy mama's boy kind of reporter that Carl always calls uptight. And of course, there was eventually a couple other people that added some comic relief, including Ruth McDevitt as Miss Emily, the elderly lady who did the love letter columns. Briefly, Carol Ann Susie played the publisher's niece, Monique Marmelstein. And another recurring character was John Fielder, the voice of Piglet in the Disney Pooh movies. He played Gordy the Ghoul, the coroner who sometimes would give Carl Kolchak some inside info about the victims of the Monster of the Week. And again, some photos from the series. Now, what's cool about this is when they talk about each episode, okay, they'll do a rundown of all the cast and crew, and they talk about the plot. You know, they'll go the original air date, and then opening. They have Kolchak's opening narration. All of his episodes start with him narrating in a cool rat-a-tat-tat, old-style reporter way to set the scene, set the stage. They give a synopsis, and then they give evaluation, which is the kind of Mark Dawidziak, the author's ranking or rating of the episode, as well as some particular, as he calls them, item. Kolchak's always saying, item, blah, 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 item. He's always mentioning some crucial piece of factual detail when he sums up the case at the end, usually. And so Dawidziak mirrors the same thing. Item, piece of information. Item, item, item. Memorable moment, memorable quote, etc. And he runs through all the series, and then in this revised edition, he talks about, what happened after ABC, after the show was canceled, and how it became a late night staple on a late night movie night on CBS in the 70s, which is where I first caught the series. And then video, Moonstone Press had a run of comics and new stories. Dawidziak himself wrote a novel, Grave Secrets, featuring Kolchak, which I'd like to get my hands on. Acknowledged descendant of Kolchak the Night Stalker in the X-Files. There's Dana Scully, Gillian Anderson, and Fox Mulder, David Duchovny in that great and very influential series. And the old style reporter would type 30 when their story was finished before it went off to press. And of course, the late, lamented, and amazing Darren McGavin with a nice photo closing out the book and an index. And as I showed you before, the Mark Dawidziak photo. Now, this book is hard to come by if you're a fan of the series. However, there are some other options you can get to. There was a blog done by two I guess you'd call them critics, online critics. They did one on the TV series Thriller, Boris Karloff's Thriller. They did one on, I believe, did they do the Night Gallery as well? I think they did the Twilight Zone, Outer Limits. I know they did several different ones. They also did one about Kolchak the Night Stalker called It Couldn't Happen Here. So, and that, if you search for that It Couldn't Happen Here blog, you'll see them going down episode by episode, and in that episode breakdown, they'll have contributions from Mark Dawidziak. Now, Mark Dawidziak's still alive, still working, thankfully still teaching, and he republished some of the stuff from this book that was out of print. Now, of course, the Night Stalker has had a long life on VHS and DVD. And a few years ago, it was put out on Blu-ray by Kino Lorber Studio Classics. And almost I think every episode has a commentary track. Some have two. And at first, they didn't seem to approach or want to approach Mark Dawidziak until a lot of fans said, hey, you got to get this guy. He's the #1 guru on Kolchak. So they eventually caved and had him do a commentary track to kind of set up this thing, set up the whole series on the very first episode of the Kolchak series, The Ripper, about Jack the Ripper. Kolchak running into Jack the Ripper in mid-1970s Chicago. Very good episode, although it mimics the kind of story structure of the first two TV movies quite a bit. Anyway, very nice Blu-ray set. The series was remastered and looks great. Much better than it ever did on DVD. Kino Lorber also remastered and released on Blu-ray the first two TV movies, which I also have. Big Kolchak fan here. Again, I highly recommend this if you're a fan and can track down a copy. If you're a fan, you might already have a copy. If not, go online and to that It Couldn't Happen Here website. You'll see quite a bit from Mr. Dawidziak that he pulls from this book, as well as adding additional information after the fact. So that's my little profile of this, the Night Stalker Companion. I know I often talk about fiction on here, but I'm a big classic movie and TV fan, and I'm sometimes going to pop up some of my TV reference books and books about Hollywood and classic movies from time to time, because there are some really good ones out there. And quite often, readers are also movie and TV watchers. So we like our entertainment in various forms, classic radio shows or radio drama, stage plays, musical theater, all those kinds of things people tend to like, and some aspect of, I'm guessing, not only books. If you're interested, I hope you can track a copy of this down. Again, it's the Night Stalker Companion, a 25th anniversary tribute by Mark Dawidziak, published by Pomegranate Press in 1997. So looking at almost a 30-year-old book, but if you're a fan of the series, it's a good thing to have. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again in the next video.